So thanks for joining probably the longest title panel there is at the LSI. Business Model Design and Digital Health, Creating, Delivering, and Capturing Value while Defending Your Business. So I think we struck the record for that one. And if my panelists would please just go down, brief introduction of yourself, who you're with, and your background and device.
Great, pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for hosting and LSI for putting everything together. Name is Bryn Davies, Chief of Business Development and Strategy at Proximie. From my perspective, I've been there 6.5 years, since seed stage right the way through to Series C and beyond. And a bit of context, I grew up in the medical device industry in orthopedics, which we were just chatting about earlier. And then for the last 10, 12 years, working with digital technologies and software in and around surgery.
Addie?
Yeah, I'm Addie Harris. I'm under another number of different hats, but HAVENTURE is kind of the main group that I work with. They're an incubator that's based in the east of France, that specializes in robotics and digital surgery, and my background is in robotics and digital surgery.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Boaz Lifschitz. I'm from Peregrine Ventures. We are an Israeli-based venture fund. We invest in varieties of health tech technologies, quite active in the medical device space, many medical device therapeutics. We started the operation in 2001.
Thank you. And what's great here is we've got investors and we've got operators. Addie was being somewhat humble, built to buy, sold her own company, built a robot for both Stryker, built to buy J&J, and Stryker bought one of your robots as well, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And then did a bit of build to buy for J&J on the inside and then finished it on the outside and sold it to them.
All right. And all of that is important from a context perspective because the digital environment is still being defined, and I don't think you can easily define it, but that's the question I'm going to open up with, so at least we can set some context, is how do you, Boaz, I'll start with you, how do you look at a digital asset as an investor with Peregrine, and what are the sort of boundaries you put on that in current day investments?
So we started, I think, to make digital investments about 6-7 years ago, and we debated at the time what would be the right approach. In a nutshell, I would say we want to see that the digital technology is as if it would be an actual device. It wouldn't be just some kind of a technology that enables better information, but it has to have a medical impact per patient. So in that respect, we are looking, and it's not easy to find technologies like that. And we believe if we find something like that, then the barrier is relatively similar to a device. You need to have the regulation, you need to have a reimbursement strategy, and the big question would be the business model. That's still a question.
So would that be a device that is transitioning to from an analog play historically in medtech, now has a data component on it, so you're already getting existing reimbursement on that, and you're hoping to potentially leverage whatever data is on board there for future value?
Generally, yes, but again, because the model with the data and the offering of the data of technology also changes, sometimes you have to adapt and find the particular new added value of the technology and the model according to that.
And Addie, not just focused on robotics, how do you define digital in today's current space? And I'm going to come back and challenge us all is how do we defend it for the future if we can't define the future of digital anyway?
Yeah, so I'll say despite my robotics background, I think in a lot of cases, robot is kind of your Trojan horse. Not necessarily in terms of, in orthopedics, say the implants that they're bringing in, but robotics is really that first step to bringing digital, and by that I mean software, software that helps with the procedure into the solution. So whether it's helping plan out how the surgery is going to go and giving the surgeon and the staff additional data that before was, like in knees, often they do this kind of push and pull, and it's a feeling, right? Robots have turned that into a number. They've turned it into a number, into a graph, into a picture. And so every surgeon now in robotic surgery that does, that's doing a knee has the same numbers that they're looking at to know that, that tension or that compression that they're applying to the knee, and that knee, how they fit it in, now has real true data to it. And so the value of the robot, often what I hear, and I hear this even about robots that many of us would say, why would you ever use that robot in the operating room? And the surgeons will tell you, I'm using it for the software. I'm using it for that piece of data, not for the robot itself. And that's why I can't go back from the robot. Now, I think the best-in-class robots, they also provide that execution piece and really, really place that implant. Many surgeons don't want to hear this, but better than the surgeon could. And so I think when you talk about, what is data? Data is an all-encompassing thing. If I think about the surgical procedure, digital is something that adds a layer of data into the procedure and a level of usability, and it's often driven by software.
And Bryn, with Proximie, the great promise of telehealth and digital, until we tried to find out who was going to pay for it. So how do you view digital from your perspective, especially in Proximie's platform?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great intro into where we sit, because it being a true digital first play and a software play that Proximie does, it's really thinking about the business model and how we would charge and who pays, coming back to the reimbursement question, but actually who benefits from having that and where the value lies. And it's interesting you talk about robotics, not just orthopedics, but more broadly for us, we're seeing the ability to connect what is physically happening in the operating room, so contextual data, video, audio, with device data that comes from the robotics and the software. You can marry the two together, and suddenly you not only know all the insights that was just described, but also you've got the context of knowing actually the surgeon pulled too hard, or someone else interfered with it, or the robot didn't turn on that time. Why did they convert to an open procedure or non-robotic procedure? And that's where Proximie marries really well with emergent technologies to give that context, which then drives value for that end user and ultimately the patient.
I mean, I like to say a robot is also a great data collection
Yes, absolutely.
device
Yeah.
in the OR, and you can collect lots of data. You may not know what you're going to do with it, but even if you find one piece that you're going to do something with it, it's a great point to start there.
It is, and you, from an individual perspective, on a micro level, that individual data set for the rep or the local person is useful to know. I've sold 100 units of my knee replacement, the robot's been turned on 110, what happened in that gap? And equally, you're saying from a macro perspective, I'm developing the next robot, I now have this data set of 10,000 robots and 100,000 knees. What does that tell me? And for us, the camera, the video, together with the data is where it really accelerates.
Yeah, we had this great case with Velis. It was in, would say our first 20 cases in the US, and the surgeon came back to us, very elite surgeon. I won't say his name, very, very elite surgeon. He had done all of our training. He went into the case and he had a couple where he felt like it wasn't executing that well. Like the cuts weren't quite as accurate as he wanted. We went and pulled the data off of the machine, and we were able to look at exactly how he was registering it. Now, we had to be very careful in how we told him, like, you're doing a crap registration. But it told us our training wasn't good enough, right? Huge value in that because it ultimately led to changing the training program, which led to driving adoption. So even there, if you don't have maybe, like the business model is so multifaceted, right? And it depends on who is selling the robot, who's using the robot, or who's the digital device. But for example, in that training piece, I can't, it would be difficult to calculate the dollars that was worth, but it was worth a huge number of dollars.
So I want to put a real challenging question, Boaz. I'm going to start with you on this one. We've got these tremendous changing centers of care, especially in the U.S. market right now, whether it's outpatient surgery we're pushing things to, hospital at home, ambulatory surgical centers. And the guidance from the FDA is changing dramatically on digital. And so is the yet to be determined reimbursement. As an investor, how do you look downrange? And this is let me finish the question. As a 10-year fund, when you make your investments with that horizon in mind, that property may or may have to move during that time period?
I think it's again it's even similar to an investment that we make in a device. Even in a device, when we know today that we start a company from scratch, and the path would be about 10 years for a company, you never really know what would be the actual model of the business model, the regulatory model, and the reimbursement model when you actually exit. So it was already complicated even in devices. Now, with the digital offering, it makes it more complicated. And to answer your question is, we always try to know and to identify what will be the strategy, but there is some kind of a leap of faith that we have to do in that area. Obviously, we have to calculate and do all the due diligence to try to know, but because things change so dramatically and so fast, then there is some kind of leap of faith there. Also, I think digital. When we look at digital investments, we don't look at a 10-year prospect. I think we look at a little bit less. In device, you have to. In digital, because it's digital, you can actually act a little bit faster. So we look more in 6 to 7 years. But still, it's relatively complicated.
Yeah. And Bryn, you've had to navigate the environment going into COVID, and Proximie's been around, what, about 8 years now?
Yep.
8 years now. So you went into COVID, and telehealth was all the rage, justifiably so. Reimbursement started to curve first, I think, in Massachusetts, and then went across. And now that seems to have sort of backed off as a go-to on the telehealth side, and that just doesn't mean telepresence on video, but across the board. How have you, as one of the executives there, navigated that and defended Proximie's position? And what has Proximie built over the last few years that you've pivoted?
Yeah, it's during that phase, it was an incredible experience. I remember pre-COVID, when COVID was emerging, there was the debate of do we pause and wait and hold back and see, or do we double down and go? We were seed, Series A stage, really thinking about our dollars and what we had, and we decided to have to accelerate during that case, and during COVID we went global, very broad, shallow sort of customer group in terms of penetration, with a few deep penetrated customers. And there's two parts to the answer your question. One is commercially, our strategy is to go deeper with fewer, more strategic relationships across every single OR and interventional suite in fewer locations, because that's more effective and efficient across any commercial scale and organization. And secondly, on the technology side, what's really happened is over that time, because we've gone global in the response to COVID, our back-end infrastructure, our tech stack, which we've built from the ground up, which we own, it means that we can actually monetize and commercialize that. So right now, we're at the stage in discussions with a number of different organizations on a robotic side of things and other emergent devices to install Proximie within that device. We can white label it and call it wherever it needs to be. But then that enables those companies, those organizations to scale globally without worrying around, multi-cloud, the regulation, the compliance, the legality, privacy from Saudi to the US to Germany, et cetera. So that's really where we're seeing the need increasingly demand, as well as our suite of applications like telepresence.
So if I understand correctly, you've created this technology and then aim that technology now as the back of the house for the digital developers that might not have that core competency in-house.
Correct. Yeah, so and it came from an initial partnership with Telidoc, where our software was going to go with their hardware, and we built a software development kit to do that. And from that, we said, well, actually, there's a lot more interest across other device companies. So we started the discussions, and we're well underway with a number of different partners to do that, from telesurgery in interventional space, right the way through to cardiac in the clinic, to robotic companies. It's really accelerating in that area.
Addie, a question for you.
Yeah.
So the acquirers of these technologies, most of the time we earmark them for the strategics, don't we?
Yes.
Right? Boaz, would you agree with that? We kind of earmark them for the strategics most of the time because they
Yes.
can write the biggest checks.
Right.
But the strategic change, different strategics, obviously.
Yeah.
I think there's potentially a slight change in the market coming as we're starting to see payers acquire some technologies so I think as you think about the business model piece, one of the pieces of advice I give companies, and I also give a lot of thought to, is that who is the acquirer and what does your business model need to be based on a number of different acquirers, and think about that early and think about it often, because I think there is so much change in the market.
So if we're driving these digital technologies, and can we all agree that that digital lead is coming from the fringes? It's certainly not coming from the strategics. Because they themselves have to defend a primarily analog model in a, let's call it, episodic place of care or diagnostic. So we're pushing all these digital technologies towards these non-digitally prepared strategics. So how do you navigate that, and how quick are they going to burn off what they need to burn off in order to adopt for this digital transition and for these companies to be bought, because they aren't set up to take this on board?
Yeah. So I can start by answering that one. That's actually why I worked for J&J for 5 years. So coming out of working with Stryker and exiting a company to them, I felt like everybody I asked around me with how do these big companies work, how do we sell digital technology to them, it was kind of a big So in my mind, I said, okay, I need to go work for one and do a bunch of deals. And I got really, really lucky. And Ewan Thompson, who I worked for when I first came into J&J, was there. And he said, hey, Addie, would you be interested in coming in and kind of building a division from the ground up? And I said, yes, here's what I want to see. I want to see how deals are made. I want to see how we build out a digital organization. I want to see how we kind of change an organization from the inside. And I had huge learnings from that. And my answer is, it is very, very hard. These companies are not built to build digital, to sell digital, to support digital, to understand digital. And even building up a very skilled organization, you're kind of almost, you're kind of like two foreign countries, and you're trying to not just defend, but try to convince them to make the right choices in acquisitions and how they treat them and how they value them. And so I think the majority of digital development is going to happen outside the big companies, and it's going to go in by acquisitions, and we can all hope they do the right thing with these acquisitions, but I think they probably have a higher chance of dying somewhere inside the company because companies don't know how to manage, it's multifaceted. They don't know how to manage the workforce. They're not great at selling them. They're not great at supporting them. They are very, very good at selling. And I've seen some of them evolve their sales force, but that evolution needs to continue because the digital technologies are evolving very fast.
Boaz, do you find yourself having to be as much of an educator to the potential acquirer about the possibility of these technologies? Because most of these acquirers are defending a position in the billions of dollars and requires them to put a bullet in the head of that business model sometimes.
We are trying to be educators, but they don't listen a lot, definitely not to us. No, but maybe more serious, obviously they know that they have to enter that game as well. So they are maybe listening, but they are, because they're used to their old-fashioned strategies and their hardware strategies, then it's hard for them to listen. And we have to, and we're doing a lot of effort to try to educate them, try to present them a different kind of ideas, try to present them ideas that they have not invested in them yet, but to understand what if that will be something that may interest them in the future. But I want to add to one thing that you said. The strategics, on one hand, we have a double challenge here. On one hand, you have to educate the strategics, the medical strategics, but on the other hand, you have new strategics in the game that we have a lot of connection and contact. We put a lot of effort to maintain our relationships with the medical strategics. So we have the people that we know, we have the network, we know them for years. Suddenly you have new players, the Google of the world, the Amazons of the world, that we don't necessarily know. And they all want to enter also, definitely in the data. So they will become players, I have no doubt about it, in the medical space as well. So that's a new challenge for us to get to know, to develop the network and get to know them. But the flip side, the positive flip side of it is that you have additional new strategic players.
I completely agree on that point. I think where the big tech companies, the Apples, the Googles, the Microsofts, have with their ability to handle data, to commercialize it into products outside of medical, and we're seeing some entrants where they're coming inside medical. I think many of the partnerships that have happened to date haven't gone well because they've started too big. And I think the industries are like so different with where they are and their understanding of each other. The places where I've seen it done well, they've started very small. And by starting small, you kind of build one thing that works and it starts to snowball. I had this coach once and he used this quote, and I like to use it everywhere. And he would say, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And I think we've seen like J&J had a really big partnership with Verb and also had one, they may still have one with Microsoft. I think we've seen some others where they've had those for a long time, nothing has come of it. And then I think we've seen some others where they started, like you think about the Apple Watch and what it's done, in the cardiac world. And that's because they started very, very small. And as they slowly built that up, it became more and more evolved. And now we're like, wow, we have this great almost medical device on our arm.
So I want to go into Proximie here for a second, because in early days, you and I were talking about Vodafone picking them up, right? So a nonpartisan player who's already a tech giant, is that the answer? And I haven't heard this company's named here yet, and I'll say it here, they are going to own healthcare in the digital, is NVIDIA. There's no question in my mind. They're a nonpartisan player who have the hardware, the software, the speed, and the leadership in order to move into that, and they're quietly insinuating themselves into the device world. But with Proximie, we talked about a Vodafone and AT&T coming in and being that open API for every player.
Yeah, it's one of the key strategies of Proximie has always been to be, the Switzerland are neutral, vendor neutral. It can work with any specialty in surgery, any business unit, which I think comes back to culture and the different business units being ready in different strategics. And absolutely, the relationship we have with AWS, we work multi-cloud, but AWS in the main, as well as the work with the telcos in different jurisdictions. So we're talking to one in Japan, for example, around them as a reseller and them going to market, because clearly differentiating 5G from 4G or someone else's 5G is a highly commoditized marketplace, and that provides them an opportunity to differentiate in that way. So, and you have the data play as well, which comes into it and saying, well, we're sitting on 100,000 videos of data and audio being captured. How best to utilize that and capitalize on that from a business model perspective, from a partnership perspective, from a patient perspective as well. So,
Addie, is it an AWS or is it NVIDIA who's more of a hardware company that potentially has the ability to create that nonpartisan environment? Because you can't have strike or buy Proximie because it becomes a closed ecosystem.
Yes.
And polyphonic to me is a wonderful word, but if you're not J&J, you can't use that system, or you're not going to want to put your data on that system.
Just right? On that, if I may, on that, I think there's two parts to it, and what I've seen evolve, having been within the strategic and being one of the first to say, actually in orthopedics, say, right, we're going to acquire, work with, joint venture digital solutions. and we're going to lay that out and bring it to market and do so in 2014 and 2013. And the software was new and people think it's crazy and all of those things. And you still have business units that think and operate in an analog way, but some business units and some individuals have gone through that pain already, and they're thinking in a far more dynamic way. So, and one of that is when will, and Medtronic from the GI side published this in a news article in May, I think, that said, we've got GI Genius, we've got a box in the Endo suite, we would like other applications to come to us so we can put them on there from wherever you're from. So some people are starting to talk in the principle of being an open ecosystem, but there's a big leap from, as you've experienced and discussed, from the saying that's what we're going to do and the practicalities of being able to do it.
From an existing player in medtech.
From an existing player.
And that's why I come back to that nonpartisan. Addie, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you almost read my mind because I was thinking about the two. It's probably a combination of both of them. I think AWS is really, really good at managing data. They're also good at seeing market opportunities and buying technology and software plays and combining them the right way to leverage like what they have with AWS. I think NVIDIA is absolutely a key piece because what they're doing with chips to accelerate basically how that data can be crunched and munched and operated. It's probably some combination of the two. I'll give kind of a corollary. I worked briefly with a software company. They were trying to do like a healthcare play. It was way too early. But they were mostly in video and worked with all of the big video companies in processing all of that video and moving it to different forms. Anyway, Amazon at the time, nobody thought like Amazon was going to build this huge video business. But some of us talked about it as we were building some products that were on AWS. We were using NVIDIA chips and doing it in-house. So NBC, everybody has these whole floors of buildings that are just stacked with hardware, right? And Amazon was like, we're going to take all that out and it's going to be at our sites. And kind of nobody believed it. And then they started slowly buying off different digital companies, and now you have all of the different Amazon live streaming, Amazon producing their own shows. They really saw that market opportunity and said, hey, wait, we have the tools, the hardware and the software and the sales force that can scale that. And I think we absolutely should be looking at an Amazon powered by the chips that can process the data as probably where that's going to go, because they're best suited to do it. They may not have the medical knowledge, but they're best suited to do it as a company.
Boaz, you've invested out of your fund in a surgical robot and a digital diagnostic that's enabled by a smartphone. Is that right?
Yes.
And so as you look at the landscape, do you tend to index towards more therapeutic or diagnostic when you think about digital, and why?
It's a good question. By default, we always prefer therapeutics, but because I think we may have to rethink this preference. If it's a medical device, then we always believed, and it turned out to be usually the right strategy, that the creation of value for a company is when the company is offering a therapeutic device, especially a single-use device. Here now, we think in digital technologies it would be the same, but because the whole game of data and the new offering of data offers, I think, new opportunities, and we may have to rethink it, but we haven't done it yet.
And just on that, just thinking about the long title that we have, I think all of that complexity and creates that, and the different players creates that opportunity that when we talk about business models, lots of times people think about revenue models, and across the business model, how you create value with your value proposition, how you deliver it through physical or software means, and operational excellence, product excellence, and defensibility, how you defend. There's a whole host of opportunities there because of the use of data, the speed of innovation, building your own tech stack and being defensible that looks beyond where everyone focuses, which generally ends up being the revenue model. And should I do software? Should I do SaaS, subscription model? Do I sell capital? All of those decisions really are born out of a far broader view. So what's exciting for me in the space is when you're pitching your business or trying to work out where you're going next or how you evolve from Series A to Series C, you've got the opportunity, as you said earlier, often to think about what is that entire business model.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking around exits, I loved what you said earlier about revisiting it regularly and often to think about what that needs to be to try and make sure it's not only attractive but sustainable in that environment as well with that strategic.
Yeah, because it may be revenue, right? That's the most
Yeah.
common. That's where everybody thinks. It may be you're dealing with a payer and they're looking at risk reduction. Risk reduction in terms of both the patient, their customer, or in terms of the cost and the dollars.
Yeah,
If they can intervene with that patient earlier, it could be to a business, to a big strategic that has implants, and it could be something to do with making that business more efficient or stickier with the customer. And so those are all different business models. It's tied at the end to revenue, but may not be as direct to revenue as we're used to doing.
Boaz?
I want to add one thing about, you mentioned the payers. I think a big part of what will happen in this field will be defined by the payers. At the moment, payers prefer or pay more significant amounts for treatments, for therapy. And if they will change and pay more for diagnostics, and that already is starting to happen, I think it will happen in larger scale, then obviously we as investors it will be easier for us to invest in that field.
Yeah.
So on that front, and I'm glad we went there, especially Addie, you can chat about this, Boaz, you can chat about this, because you've built complex robots and you've developed a great complex robot as well. As an investor and as a build to buy and an investor as well, we've seen it with the giant Intuitive, they no longer say we've sold this many robots. The term now is placed, because we're creating these platforms to be on the OpEx budget instead of the CapEx budget in a lot of times.
Yeah.
And so that changes the financing and the dynamics of financing in these expensive to fund startups. So Boaz, how are you thinking about that in current or future investments? Because it changes the dynamics substantially.
Yeah, in the current investments, our robotic company that we have, we started to think more like that, less in capital business model. Yes, but it's a little more complex there. But still, there is a serious model there and serious model for additional devices for the robot. For future investments, we definitely will look at different models because we believe that the world is going to that direction, and it will.
You'll
happen.
work that into your thesis moving forward, that most of the time this is going to be a SaaS or a per-click model in these instances.
We believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Addie, as you develop platforms in the robotics in the $1 million plus range,
Yeah.
what guidance have you gotten from strategics on that and the go-to-market?
Yeah, so it's multiple streams of revenue that they want to see. They're playing around a lot with that capital one. Are they going to? Some hospitals want to buy their capital. They don't want the strings attached of having that place that then they're required to do so many procedures per year. Other hospitals, and I'm not going to say it even depends on, whether we're talking about a small ASC or, a very wealthy research hospital. I've seen both have the same opinions. They want to buy it or they want it placed. So I think it's important that you really think about your different revenue streams. So you have your capital revenue stream. You have your service each year, which is maintaining your software. It's a software license, as well as your actual mechanical servicing of a device. And then you have something that I'll say is per click. So it may be a package of disposables. It may be some features in that software. And by differentiating it that way, it very much like the Intuitive model, and why Intuitive has been so successful is you have all these recurring revenue streams. If you were to depend only on that capital piece, it's very easy to get displaced from the market. It maybe is 5 years that somebody has to wait, but then you can be displaced. Intuitive has been so smart because the majority of their money right now, of their revenues coming in are, I mean, it dwarfs actually their capital sales, is what they're making on service per year. So just keeping the software up to date.
Well, the service and the lease too, because you can run that 5-year lease, and at the end of 3.5 years before they go out
Yes.
for another CapEx acquisition, you can re-up that lease with highly beneficial.
Yes.
Since you've already got that major cash flow on the disposal.
Yeah, here, let me
side of
give
things.
you a discount on the next model.
I'll throw in a free Ion if you
Yes.
bring in another D5, right?
Exactly.
Which is no different in other industries. You're looking at, Tesla now charge a subscription for your, for the latest and greatest software on that element. So other industries are looking at how they evolve into less capital, and it makes sense that, med device and robotics does as well. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So an item that has bitten most organizations in the tail on this digital transition, because digital generally will impact workflow quite a bit in sites of care, whether it's a robot, whether it's telehealth. And you've usually got internal stakeholders in the site of care, whether it's a hospital, an ASC outpatient, or even hospital at home. The stakeholder could be the patient.
Yes.
And adjusting that workflow, if the change management isn't managed properly, can add a substantial barrier to that. So how much of your thought process, we'll start with you, Bryn, goes into not just dropping a digital solution, whether it's imaging, robotics, telehealth, on the doorstep of the site of care? How important is that to really manage?
Yeah, and I know we're coming up against time, so incredibly important. And as you scale, it becomes more and more impactful. So from the telepresence component to recording every surgery to then having AI algorithms that are fed back to better inform that real-time experience, there's definitely an impact on the surgeon and the team around them. So for us, we're thinking about not going from no longer 0 to 1 or 0 to 1,000. It's from 1,000 to 10,000 to 20,000 to 50,000 units of ORs powered by Proximie. It's really thinking about how it's integrated. So it comes back to either deploying it as when you switch the lights on, Proximie comes on as well, and we're working with partners on that. We have resellers that do that. To the devices themselves, actually now coming to us and saying, can we build it onto Proximie onto our devices, our new emerging technologies, because that obviously when it's switched on makes it easier. And ultimately, having 6.5 years of this, of working through it, you really need to ensure you add value to those end users. And by doing so and making it easier and easier in that workflow, really adds value in that sense, which
Addie?
drives
Yeah,
growth.
I'll say, usability, right?
Yeah.
Do your usability. From the very beginning, you need to think about usability, bringing usability experts, listen to, interview all of the potential users of your device. It isn't maybe that top line user that you're thinking about. Think about all of the staff that's in that care setting. And then this has been one of my lines to my teams many times over the years, is listen to what they say, but more importantly, watch what they do. Watch what they do in those care settings, because they're not thinking about that flip on of the lights.
Yeah.
Because those are those really, really important integration points that can make a device just work so much better, which is going to lead to greater adoption.
And that ethnographic research, the medical devices are at the forefront of that, then benefit from actually researching and doing that. I can agree.
I took one of my usability engineers in Velis, and we had this great surgeon, Dr. Green. We had her be the pretend patient on a table, and he had his whole staff come do a surgery, and she said, "Why are you making me sit on the table? I should be the one taking the notes." And I said, "No, I want you to be there in the center of it and see where are they having challenges."
Yeah.
And she came out of that, she was like, she couldn't talk fast enough with how much feedback she had on little small changes she wanted to make with the device.
Boaz?
I agree with my colleagues, and I don't think I have much to add to that. So, yeah, I definitely agree.
All right, so we're inside 2-minute drill here. So there's entrepreneurs sitting in the audience or out mulling about, and they've got a digital product. And so the top 3 things that they should walk away with as they consider the next 12 to 24 months in their organization with a digital product.
Defined exactly the product. What's the like in devices, what's the regulation here? And I think not less important would also be reimbursement. Try to think about what the potential reimbursement would be, even though it's very hard to guess.
Addie?
I would say understand your problem and be able to articulate and pitch the problem very, very well. Whether you're raising money, whether you're selling your company, whatever phase you're at, it's important to stay very close to your problem. Understand your business model, how your product is going to sell or ultimately make your company or whoever buys you money, and usability.
And Bryn?
Yeah, for me, I'd say that first start with what the goals are. And this may seem obvious, but the strategy of saying, well, am I trying to gain share? Am I trying to drive revenue? Be really clear, whatever phase you're at within that, your business at the time. And from that, your business model of how best to deliver that, how best to add value, how best to price it, subscription, capital, whatever it is, how best to defend it, all falls out from that and narrows down your choices, because there's so many things you could do and people focus on how to grab revenue. If you just take that step back, think about what you're trying to achieve in the next 12, 18 months, the decisions become so much easier as a result. And I loved what Addie said earlier about revisiting that regularly as you evolve, and particularly if you're getting closer to an exit, of what would that desire be and how would it work, and how you can match up.
And don't be afraid to be bold about that business model. There probably are models out there we haven't thought of, and they can be the real deciding point
Correct.
in an acquisition.
Yeah, other industries have a look.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to fail.
Yes.
Spoken like a pure Israeli. Well, thank you all so much for contributing and sharing your knowledge with the audience. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.